I'm Nick Kanoki, Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I just want to start off today's session by thanking our patron sponsors. They help make this possible. Definitive Logic, Onuma System, ABS Quality Evaluations, and ABS Group. We especially want to note Onuma System today for Kimon Onuma's participation in the session we just had and the session upcoming on transportation. We also want to thank our organizational members, especially Lifecycle Engineering for Jesse Rothkopf's participation today. And we also want to thank the Andrew James Advisory Group. They are launching another ALN A55K professional certification course that starts November 8th. So if you're interested in ISO 55000 professional development, please reach out to the Andrew James Advisory Group or anyone at the ALN. And with that, I will just say, if you're out there watching, we would love to hear from you. So please send any questions, comments, or feedback to the chat. If it's a question, we'll try to get it answered live or potentially in overtime if we have too many questions or too much good discussion. Mike, are you going to start off this panel as well?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Nick. We really appreciate the professionalism you bring to the ALN. And welcome to our guests who were just speaking about leadership. And now we're going to be getting into a more focused look at transportation and transit. The Asset Leadership Network is setting up asset leadership boards, and we're calling them industry asset leadership boards. So this is the transportation/transit asset leadership board, because we have this one message of benefits from a structured approach to asset management, and we need to deliver it to many different sectors in the language that will resonate with them. And so today we have Mildred Chua-Ulger, who was the asset manager for the New York City Metropolitan Transit Authority, Jesse Rothkopf from Lifecycle Engineering, and Kimon Onuma from Onuma Inc. And this is a very freewheeling conversation. Mildred, will you start off by just talking about the message and how we might be able to improve our delivery to this specific sector?
So, transportation is like a lifeblood, right? And it's really comprised of many different sectors. I mean, you have ports, you have transit, right? Yeah, I mean, those are two great examples. Water, utilities, energy, all of those are connected somehow to transportation, and there's like an impact and the connections between these sectors is so key to overall delivery of service to customers, right? I mean, a customer consumes services from all the different sectors, and how we interact with each other in these sectors is key in terms of being able to provide that service that's desirable to the customers and everybody at large. So transportation is truly very important. There's a lot in terms of asset management over the years that has been focused on transportation. MAP 21 is one, and now the infrastructure bill that's forthcoming also will have a big impact on transportation.
So what you're expressing is a holistic approach to basically national assets or municipal assets or county and state assets. We've been delivering a message of breaking down silos inside of an organization, but you're saying the silos need to be broken down in society. In
society, across different sectors. That's right. There is some really great work going on now, wherein transportation organizations are getting together to understand how they operate, so that you could build better communication lines and say, listen, if Los Angeles has a nice framework for how they interact with other sectors within that region, that maybe New York can learn from it, or they can learn from New York, because New York also has a lot of those types of environments that are in place. New York has MTA, which is more different sectors. You have bridges, tunnels, transit, right, rail. You've got the Port Authority that has also ports and transit and rail. So when you think about these organizations, I mean, they already are like a system of systems. And then within a region like New York, it can talk to each other also, and they do. I know that at the MTA, when I was there, we had frequent engagement with the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey because it's what we call the sister agency in the region. We had similar assets. So we wanted to make sure that we were delivering consistent service. Our customer base is the same. So we work towards that a lot from an asset management perspective.
So you had mentioned map 21, and I was going to bring that up because as far as I know, map 21, which is 2016 transit legislation that required the submission of an asset management plan in order to get funding.
Right.
And Bob Tusillo, who is from the Federal Transit Administration in the Department of Transportation, came to the National Academies at one of our events and told us that that requirement for an asset management plan came from ISO 55000 and his knowledge of the value of that. They provided $1 million for education for entities that did not know how to put together an asset management plan. So the legislation even funded an education that probably resonated throughout the organization. So I wanted to mention that, and it just so happens that Jack, and I'm assuming that this is Jack Kelly, has asked the question, did map 21 have an important impact on how local transit agencies manage their assets? Can you describe how the things were done before map 21 versus after it? Mildred, you're in the best position to take a stab at that. Can you?
Sure.
Okay.
Happy to do it. Happy to do it. So from the MDA's perspective, map 21 requirements were compared to the current capital planning process that they had at the time, right? How do they make decisions? How do they package their capital plans? How do they do their needs assessments? All of that. There was a study that was done just to make sure that we were in a position, or they were in a position to produce this asset management plan, which was the new requirement. And the results of that study, and it was a peer review actually, was that the MTA already had a very robust capital planning process. It really was long range, 20-year range. It hit all the notes, like we have a checklist for map 21, all the different pieces. And it said, yes, the MDA's processes currently already does this when they produce a capital plan. So I'm stressing capital plan here, right? Well, wherein it's fine to submit that as a requirement to get funding, because the funding is really for capital projects. But where the improvement needed to be from an asset management perspective, which is what was taken on then at the time, the platform for the MDA for asset management was to make it holistic. Not just for capital needs, maintenance needs, all your needs, right? You look at it holistically so that your plans are integrated. You come from the same base of assets, and from there you develop your maintenance plans, your operations plans, your capital plans, and you have an understanding of the impact of all those plans on each other, and they're all long range. And so what I'm saying is that from the MTA's perspective, they already had a very robust planning process that needed to be improved with support of a new CMMS system, with the support of better data collection, not just from the CMMS system, but from all the other operational systems that would need to be integrated with the CMMS system to deliver better actionable intelligence, right? Because you have data from different aspects of the organization that you do need to sort of combine when you put on your asset management lens and say, okay, how does this tell me which way to go in terms of making a decision on what to do with my assets or how to deliver service. So I think that map 21 from the MDA's perspective was a welcome was a welcome approach, because the downside of it, let me just tell you, is that then there are those who said, well, we're already doing it great, so we're just continue with our current process with the capital plan, and you know what, we're great. Everybody's going to be happy. We'll get our federal funding, and that's great. And that's really what happened, is that there was not a lot of momentum to push in the direction of making it a holistic approach of capital and operating plans being done together from the same base. And that was one of my platforms. That was my platform. As a CFO, I wanted the maintenance budget, the operations budget to be aligned so that I know the impact, vice versa, of capital versus operating, balance of investments from a financial perspective was understood. I thought that was very important from a financial perspective. And that's what I tried to do and put in place a lot of that while I was there.
Oh, you're on fire, Mildred. I'm going to ask you to keep going. So what is coming up with MAP 21, and how do you think, from what you've heard through your connections throughout the country and world, any implications of what MAP 21 has had on organizations? And then please inform us what is coming next with MAP. There are further requirements for MAP 21.
So, I mean, I think MAP 21 provided a consistent framework from which all the transit agencies can follow and produce asset management plans, right? So that when the federal government was looking at, the FDA was looking at proposals for funding, it was from a consistent perspective. It had all the right components, right? So that you're looking at apples to apples, okay? BART's proposal for a project to be funded versus the MTA's was gonna be through the same lens, because they followed the same parameters in terms of how they planned and how they arrived at the decision to fund that asset, to ask for funding for a specific asset or a project. So that was the impact, is that it gave agencies a framework. It standardized transit agencies in terms of how their thinking is, at least from a capital planning perspective, right? Because all of them immediately went into their capital plans and started, applying it there, because that's where projects come from that you need funding for, is in the capital plan. And there was a big difference. And I remember that the first asset management plan was due in 2018. The next one is due in 2022. An update is due in 2022. So I've already left. And my question before I was leaving the organization was, are you guys ready? Because the pandemic has just happened. So many new things has happened in the world that would impact how we manage our assets, that would impact availability of our assets. And maybe we need to include other assets we normally don't include in our planning processes, right? Because they're too small, they're not that important. Maybe they're now important because it's a different world. That was a question I left behind, because this next plan, which is being developed now, and every transit organization out there is updating theirs, is most likely looking at it through different lenses now that includes sustainability, resiliency, in terms of the pandemic as well. So that's where we're at. I don't know of any additional requirements. I was going to ask someone from the FDA if they were revising their requirements to include, those new things that I had envisioned we would need to look at in order to enhance our plan and make it more realistic to today, right? To today's environment. So I do not have any information in terms of whether there are new requirements along those lines or if they have been communicated.
Yeah, but that's a great perspective. And I've got an example from our panels last week. It's not in transit, but everything is so overlapping, there's something to learn. So the Bureau of Reclamation had been on their asset management and ISO 55000 journey for many years. And last week we learned that in early 2021, legislators asked them for what kind of funding they might need through an infrastructure bill once Joe Biden was president and this was going to be happening. They had their asset management plan, their entire strategic asset management plan, which laid this all out.
Mhm.
It was already there, sent it to legislators. Word for word, it was put in legislation. So if it passes, they get $30 billion and all of their backlog is taken care of.
Wow.
But that's only if you have your asset management plan ready and can send it off. So that's a lesson. All right, so we've been talking at this pretty high level in the legislation. Let's bring it into some on the ground activities. And Kimon, I believe you have a presentation that can help start this part of the discussion.
Yeah, it's a shorter one. Let's go to that. Hopefully it works. See my screen?
It's saying that Kimon has started sharing screen, but it's not popping up. So if the same fix is needed for this, and you have to log off and log back in, we can go to Jesse to provide some comments until you come back.
Sure. Just to, I mean, Mildred, you said that so well. I think that requirement in MAP 21 to build in the asset management plan, there was some real brilliance behind that. It forced the organizations to start looking across the stakeholder, their internal stakeholders, and breaking down those silos so that they can actually get a picture of what's going on financially within the organizations. And to your point, Mike, where now some of this discipline in asset management has just started to really mature in public infrastructure, where people are now able to look across their organization, have a good asset registry, know what their assets are. They're starting, once they look at and build their asset registry, then they could start building it into a hierarchy and looking at criticality. What are my most critical assets within my organization that I need to maintain the most? But then they also are starting to look at, how does it work with the storerooms and the inventory of spare parts and things like that within my organization. So once they got the requirement for an asset management plan in there, it wasn't just about the financial side of that. It was extending those tentacles into the entire organization and saying, all right, we are an asset intensive organization. Let's act like it. Let's start sharing information. Let's start using the information from one part of the organization to another. So yeah, that was a brilliant move to build that into the MAP 21 program. And we're starting to see the accountability in some of these investments of, our tax money. We're really starting to see that accountability now, and the culture has started to change a little bit, where they're recognizing that they need to have that accountability. And one other thing that Mildred mentioned at the beginning, transit or transportation in general, as public infrastructure, it's really tied to all public infrastructure. It's there to make the community flourish, to benefit the society, and not just to provide transportation to and from work, but to get to hospitals and schools, to get to the airports, other forms of transportation, sporting events. It really transcends all of the culture. So it's really a connected system of systems. And with the ability to start building an asset management system and looking across those silos internally, you also start looking at the stakeholders externally too. And I think we'll talk a little bit about that when we get into resilience.
Okay. We can get into resilience later on, but then Jesse is also going to be on a panel coming up on resilience. So Jesse, you also used a keyword there, flourish, and that reminded me that our colleague Michael Salvato gave us 3 documents from the UK let's make sure to talk about those later on and how they could influence the US. But Kimon, we've got this, your screen, we're seeing it. So go
Okay,
ahead.
good. All right, so this one's going to be a shorter one, but I'm going to be kind of centered around transportation and that theme. But I want to start off with talking about the biggest and the baddest asset. I wanted to put this on screen because I like that. Baddest asset. Okay, what is it? And I think you already gave a hint of this earlier, Mike, but I think it's the 1973 development of the Global Positioning System by the Department of Defense. This has been, I think, in the history of humankind in many ways, the biggest change that has happened. And here's why. In 2007, Korean Airlines strayed into Soviet airspace because it did not have GPS. It crossed over and got shot down because it lost where it was, didn't have a visual clue of where they were exactly. That was the reasoning. That same year, a directive was signed to open up the Department of Defense Global Positioning System for civilian use. This was a system that's used for defense purposes that was opened up to the public, including to adversaries, to avoid catastrophes like this. That resulted in everything that we do now is relying on that global positioning system. The way we find our Starbucks, the way we find location, the way we relate information and be able to visualize where we are and where our assets are, it completely transformed the world. And it still is. And I think we need to think more in terms of what can we do with this? Obviously, a lot of the technologies and approaches to asset management are using a lot of this. And it's really about finding location, being able to visualize where things are in relationship to the transportation network. And especially for transportation, because it's a global scale network, that location is so critical to be able to make any kind of informed decision. And I think we need to leverage this more. And this was a 2010 article that I put together about location and geographic information systems relating to building information modeling. And a few years ago with the Asset Leadership Network, we actually had a BIMStorm workshop, which was called Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, about visualizing assets relating to all of this infrastructure and places. And this was a theoretical exercise, but it was based on real world scenarios. And the reason we do these is because we found that in real world scenarios, the contracts and the way that projects are set up to work, they're already siloed by default at the very beginning. So we need to force this interaction to be able to come up with real scenarios that can then be applied back to projects. So we have this constant cycle with BIMstorms where we're testing things out, throwing things away that don't work, and then inserting them into actual projects. So we set up these scenarios of the different type of use cases when you look at planes, trains, and automobiles, a terminal building, the hangars, a control tower, the fueling, a lot of logistics relating to keeping things moving, including the facilities and buildings and train stations and how all these come together. We had a lot of different stakeholders that brought in their knowledge and their expertise and their standards, including the Asset Leadership Network with ISO 55000, and set up these scenarios around these real world approaches on planning. And we used the San Jose airport. We had San Jose, the facility team, actually opening up their data and allowing us to pull this all together. And we set up these scenarios, and it was really centered around how do we get people to interact? And we've been talking about this for the last hour and a half, actually, in the previous session too, is how do we get people inserted into these systems? How do we make the information graphical and easy to understand so you can visualize assets and asset related decisions in relationship to the network that they're connected to, whether they're planes, whether they're buildings, whether they're individual standalone assets and CMS systems. It's really all interconnected. And we ran these scenarios, and it was a very short exercise in many ways. It was just actual, not real project, but real short exercises connecting the dots at looking at aircraft, looking at gate scheduling, at spatial requirements, at criteria, at standards and codes, at the master planning, at the movement of people and equipment, not only at the airport itself, but also at the global scale. What planes are coming into the airport impacts how the airport operates, how it reacts to that. So we actually had, and this goes back to the GPS system, we know exactly where planes are in the world right now because it's published online. You can actually track them in real time, right? which is a piece of data that can trigger a color change, and a terminal that can trigger, well, we need to plan for this plane that's coming in an hour late. This is a real scenario that we actually latched onto. What happens when a plane comes in late and you have to move infrastructure and spaces and facilities around to accommodate for that? And then what happens if you forecast forward? Because it's not only what's happening now, you have to be able to forecast the future. What happens when there's too much crowding happening at gates at the rush hour points of that particular airport, which changes by airport. San Jose was a very kind of a morning and an afternoon rush hour where the gates get really crowded and you have to restack things. And then as schedules change, so everything is the complexity of everything being a moving target. The only logical way to really do it is to be able to visualize it in relation to a map or a 3D map, a 3D model in relation to those decisions that are happening, and to have people to able to react. And we had a whole study about total cost of ownership. If we need to expand a gate, how much is it going to cost to build, and how much is it going to cost us to operate it over the life cycle? And also looking at it from a threat perspective, what happens if something bad happens, if a piece of the building goes down or infrastructure goes down, how does it impact not only that airport, but other airports, because they start having this trickle effect. That part is the part that's really interesting to us. If you start thinking of all these interconnectivities and the visualization aspect, how do we fit a wide body plane at that gate? Do we need to change things around? How mission critical, and this goes back to the Coast Guard work years ago, and the Navy did this as well too. How do you, the mission dependency, what's critical to the mission to keep that airport operating? What happens if part of it goes down? What other risks are there from a risk perspective to everything, right? There's all kinds of different risks as far as security and other things too. So looking at from a security perspective, and then also looking at from financial perspective, we started just testing out, what does blockchain look like? How can we actually insert that into the scenario? And then also looking at the adjacent infrastructure about the rail system that supports that airport. How does it impact getting people in and out of the facility? So that's really it. I was more about using this kind of visualization capability to trigger discussions and then apply the lessons learned back into real projects to try and break down these traditionally broken silos that don't talk to each other.
So Mildred, let's discuss. What does that make you think?
Again, another project that I left behind was a pilot that was done for the railroads, the MTA, that took all the information that was available now through the CMMS system, plus other connected systems, including inventory, right? And just saying, okay, if I needed to plan for a capital project and make an investment, you know, you start by just seeing the visuals, like where are the most deteriorated sections of the network, zoom in on a particular aspect of the network, understand what other projects are going on at the same time that could maybe impede operations at that location, so that you can make decisions in terms of what type of treatment you want to do, right? Is it a quick and dirty one because it's a heavily congested area and you really can't overcrowd it, or is it something that's wide open that you can really go in there and just make, you know, have a big project to once and for all replace something. But anyway, what that really showed us in that pilot was it was really put to test for us when they were looking at you know, in the financial crisis, they were looking at budget reductions, right? Or where can we temporarily put a pause on spending because we don't have enough resources right now. The pandemic has resulted in reduced revenues and so forth. So really a big fiscal crisis was going on. And so using all of that data and the systems that we had in place, able to sort of test it and say, okay, if the capital plan had an investment in this area of about, let's say, $500 million that was supposed to be awarded in a current year, what could we pause that? And how long could we pause that without compromising the state of good repair of that area, right? And really having, you know, severe deterioration that would impact customer service. And so you could see that without having an integrated systems and the data in front of you, I mean, that would be hard to answer that question, right? I mean, you can just say, okay, we really need just 200 million, so let's cut it by 300 million. In this case, we were able to model what it would look like if you reduce it by 100 million, by 200 million, by 300 million. And what it really showed is that over the life of the asset and over the next 5 years, you could afford to actually reduce or pause the investment in that area, specific area, by about a couple of $100 million, and not significantly impact deterioration, which would then, of course, lead to service issues, right? And that was so powerful. And the executives actually were like aha moments, like, we really need to have this in place, which means the asset management program needs to, accelerate all the efforts that it was doing to build the system, to integrate the data. Key is data here, and having the data be available to run for these types of scenarios to enable decision making. So that's what I can share from this, is that it's definitely a very powerful tool to have all your data and your systems all aligned to help, because you don't ever know what scenario you're looking for. The leaders have things in mind. They ask a question and you need to be able to quickly say, all right, let's run that scenario. And if you have the right data, it will help you make the right decisions or understand the impact if the decisions are painful.
Jesse, have you had experience about information visualization that has helped in
Sure.
decision-making?
Yeah, I mean, Kimon started this talking about GPS and, just thinking about the railroad. The work that we've done up at Long Island Railroad was implementing a new CMMS system, computerized maintenance management system, with a geospatial information system. So you think, when you're talking about assets for a railroad, you're thinking locomotives and rail cars, but there's also track, and that's a very complex system. It's not just two steel bars. There's signals, there's power, a lot of electrical power to move those cars. There's the track themselves. There's bridges and structures and culverts and things like that. There's 7 different disciplines that go into track maintenance. And one of the most important aspects of maintaining that entire network so that the rail cars can move is looking at the geospatial aspects of that and saying, all right, we need to be able to do an inspection, walk down a track and say, we see an anomaly here. Can't quite tell what it is at this point, but mark it for inspection or for some sort of maintenance procedure later on, or using a geometry car where they can pull a car down the track and it can tell within tenths of millimeters if the track is pushed out too far in a curve, because the rail cars tend to push the tracks out, or if the profile of the interface where the track and the wheel meet is degraded too much. All of these things affect ride quality. They affect the speed that the rail car can move through a certain system. All of these things affect the entire system and how fast we can move people from one point to another. So the geospatial information aspect of that is critical. Being able to link it together with the asset management piece is really critical. And then, just getting back to data visualization, that really is some of the best examples I've seen in transportation for data visualization are the ability to look at an executive level of what's going on with the network and drill down into subsequent, into a greater degree of information. Virginia DOT has a really good dashboard where you can see, the dashboard tells you how well the roads are moving. What is the level of efficiency on the road? What is the level? There's another dashboard about projects. We could see, are they meeting their goals for projects, and safety dashboard. And each one of these, you could start to drill down all the way to the point where you could say, oh, I want to know what's going on with the project in my neighborhood. And you could drill down to that. So data visualization has the ability to bring all the different stakeholders together and get the information that they need, which is so important for public infrastructure.
Great, thank you for that specific example. So now I'd like to get into some kind of the board discussions. What can we do to help bring an asset management perspective to transit agencies around the country and around the world? Anyone want to start off with that? Mildred, looks like you're warming
I
up.
can get, yeah, I can get started. First of all, by saying that, I mean, I think the asset management perspective is very much alive in the transportation sector, right? So there is a, MAP 21 has allowed that for the transit agencies. Utilities sector also is very much entrenched in asset management perspectives. So I think it's about communication. It's about creating the lines of communication across these different sectors, because right now there is awareness from within, and each organization is out there building themselves, but it's that external communication that is key, because we end up serving the same customers in the region. Like all of us together, all of the different service providers work together to provide different services, but it's impacting that same customer. So I think an understanding across the different sectors and promoting in transportation, right? Having that understanding be much more disseminated across the different types of transportation, rather than just within rail, within transit, or within ports, I think would be key. Helping them understand what makes each other tick, and how do we work together to improve service, the services
Excellent.
that we provide.
Excellent. So MAP 21 put asset management on the map in the transit world, and it's moving along well there. And let's use the transit world as an example to the other sectors. Clearly, the Chicago L system needs electricity in order to, propel it down the rails. And so whatever message might be shared from them to the electric utility could be good. Jesse, do you see some of this cross-pollination capability?
We see it a lot so the US is in a little bit of a mini renaissance in asset management. We're really, since MAP 21, we're seeing a lot more focus on asset management. You're starting to see chief asset officers in the C-suite. You're seeing global directors of reliability in big manufacturing firms. It's really getting the attention that it deserves. I think I'm going to use the UK as an example, and some of the information that Mike Salvatos shared with us. Over in the UK, they're really looking across that public infrastructure and seeing how, the power and the transit system and the hospitals are all working together to really help society to meet those mission goals. I think we still have a little ways to go here in the United States, in North America, in that aspect. We're making great progress on asset management as a discipline. We're getting down those fundamentals. And I think I hope in the near future, we're going to see some more focus from leaders in asset management, both at client level and people like ourselves, to talk about how we can extend that collaboration beyond the boundaries of our organization, to talk to other organizations, to engage all the stakeholders that are involved.
So since you brought up those documents, you want to mention anything more about them?
I just pulled up the email. I had a feeling you might ask me. There's three documents that Mike Salvato had recommended. One is a piece on re-envisioning infrastructure as the platform for human flourishing. And this gets right down to the fact that public infrastructure is there to serve society. It's not always a moneymaker. I mean, you know, Bridge and Tunnel in New York makes some money in, but the other parts of the MTA often run a deficit. But if you look at how New York City would look without the MTA, it would not be New York City. New York City is enabled. It is there because of the MTA. Those two go hand in hand. So looking at how infrastructure supports human flourishing, we really have to think about that. Sounds kind of pie in the sky, but it really is the way that we need to look at it. The second document that Mike shared with us is a bold vision for the built environment. And this, I believe, is looking at, you know, a little bit what Kimon does about building information management, using digital twins, you know, a 7D model that looks at, you know, the 3D structure over time with all the costs and all the operating procedures and how humans move in and out of these systems, to be able to look at how an investment is going to impact the community and what kind of problems you might run into from the very beginning. And it gets down to Kimon's first slide deck this afternoon about leadership, breaking down the silos between, you know, the organizations that design a project and the organizations that build it and the organizations that operate and maintain it. If you build that digital twin across, you can actually get those disparate parties collaborating together. And then the third article that Mike mentioned was Transforming Infrastructure Performance, a Roadmap to 2030. And that's really looking at driving step changes in infrastructure performance and, you know, what kind of things we need to do. So Mike, I think you might, are you going to post those on the website?
I'm putting the links up right now as you're talking.
Great.
And then Mildred, do you want to have equal time to respond to some of the things that Jesse just said?
Yeah, so what I wanted to say is the infrastructure bill that is like being talked about so much, right? So right in front of us is larger than MAP 21, because MAP 21 was a lot focused on transit. And this is the opportunity now for all of infrastructure to actually get their requirement for the asset management plan, so to speak, or strategic asset management planning to be part of how organizations plan for the future. So I wanted to add that in there because I think there's a lot of discussions, even at the AOLN, with the infrastructure bill, embedding equity, right, into it. All of those things are, it's a perfect opportunity right now for asset management to help influence that or be part of it, be part of the foundation of it.
Excellent. So we do want to say that the Asset Leadership Network has a position that if any legislation says, like MAP 21 did, in order to receive funds, you have to have an asset management plan, the nation will be served greatly. So please send this to all of your legislators so that we can get that simple language in there. And then hopefully they also fund education on asset management planning through that. Kimon, have you seen other countries leading in asset visualization?
Other countries, it varies. I don't think anybody's really solved it all, but there's been a lot of standards development relating to, if you go back to building information modeling for many years now, but it has been really mainly centered around the design and construction of buildings, although the BIM standards are being expanded into bridges and transportation and other types of uses as well too. And the digital twin is an important kind of a rallying point where people are starting to understand that if you have the equivalent piece of information in a digital format, then you can start making decisions with it. I think, again, even on digital twins and what's happening around the world, I think if you have the resources to do a full-blown model, it's great, but there's also some very simple starting points, again, with a simple digital twin, kind of what's the minimum viable digital twin that we can make decisions with. Because a lot of times there's this whole flashy thing about you put 3D goggles on, you walk through. Yes, you can do that, but there's also kind of, if you look at the maps again, the GPS, when we look at a map of finding Starbucks, you don't necessarily need a 3D model of that building to find a Starbucks. You do need it if you want to find out what's in the building to manage that asset inside the mechanical equipment, maybe. So that kind of layering of being able to get to that point quickly, I think, different countries around the world have, and the UK has actually been pretty advanced in the use of all this as well. So I think we should learn, and this is about the sharing part. We need to be able to share wins openly, and then also share losses, do things that don't work, and then move quickly to a solution.
Well, speaking of sharing, Nick, will you let Jack Kelly share his question by making him a panelist? Jack, I was going to ask the question that you sent in, but we have the technology, so we might as well.
He should be joining any second as a panelist.
Thank you.
Goodness,
Oh, Jack. Jack,
I don't want a different shirt. Hey.
Jack is ALN board member and an ALN senior fellow. And he asked an earlier question, and instead of me asking it, why don't you go ahead and ask your question, Jack?
Well, let's see. I guess for whatever reason, now that I'm a panelist, I can't see my question.
Oh, so let me read it for you. Is there any national professional associations in the transportation sector that promote asset management and provide training that helps the various transportation modes to make progress in adopting effective asset management practices? And before we go to the questions, can I ask you why you were asking about associations?
Yeah, because one of the things that we are doing as part of the National Asset Leadership Strategy is we're trying to identify all of the influencers that could bring an asset, that could promote asset management to not only the larger community of asset owners and operators, but also to the political process. And a lot of times, I know, like we've talked to David Topman at the ASCE, and they have a really powerful lobbying operation that helps connect their different sector people who do the sector report cards to the congressional committees and subcommittees that control the legislation that might affect those sectors. So I'm just curious if there are organizations, professional organizations in the transportation world that might have those kind of lobbying activities as well, and that might be ways to get the message promoting asset management into the infrastructure bill that you've been talking about.
Mildred, I think you might be able to respond to that most effectively first.
Right, okay. So Transportation Research Board, which is part of the National Academy of Sciences, has an asset management group, I believe. There is a national conference on asset management every 2 years that's put on by the TRB. So it's focused on asset management. All the transit agencies and the DOTs are the clients there. So they are, so asset management planning is definitely embedded in all of those organizations. So that's the one that I can think of that's big. The other one is APTA, Association for Public Transit. I don't know what the A stands for, but
Administrators.
Administrators, yes. They have asset management related sessions, but they don't, it's not a big promoting thing about asset management. So it's more fluid. You'll see it in certain sessions, but it's not really promoted separately like TRB actually has a specific national conference every 2 years, and also a standing committee on asset management that meets regularly and puts out papers and does all that. So I don't know if the AOLN has been working with TRB on asset management.
That's why I'm asking the question, because one of the things that we're trying to do is to understand the landscape of organizations that either are currently promoting, they're aware of asset management and they're currently promoting it to their professional, members, or that might be candidates to be engaged in helping kind of bring them up to speed on the advantages of asset management and get them to connect with their various members to promote it. And some of the work that I'm doing in Working Group 7 on the draft ISO 55011, which deals with how you create what we call an enabling environment for asset management through public policy, is all about identifying elements of those enabling environments, which could include professional associations. They could include public policy agencies if some of them are engaged in asset management promotion already. It can include academia. So it's a way of creating this kind of environment of influencers who can support and reinforce some of the asset management messages that we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I've been active with TRB, so I know that I've always been on their planning committee. So I know that they have a strong voice even within TRB. So I think that would be a good start. There's the IAM that has also the North American chapter, also beginning to get more and more presence, because it's been a few years, it's really more UK based, but now I think it's getting really established here in the United States with many different chapters. And they're all sectors, they're just not transport. They are all sectors are welcome. So that is another great forum to promote or to talk to different organizations that are involved in asset management.
Mildred, will you talk a little bit about your role with the Institute of Asset Management?
Very, very recently, I was asked to chair the Knowledge and Leadership group, which is really called IAM Centers. It's really from the UK. And then from there, it oversees the chapters, the development of knowledge, and coordinates across the different chapters globally in terms of what asset management knowledge is being developed, how it's maintained, how it's disseminated, making it available for everyone. So it's really exciting because it's you can see that there are different places around the world, and different chapters are involved, and they focus on different types of asset management information that's important to them. So even just looking at the landscape of like what chapters are focusing on, you can tell like what is important to them, because some are more into frameworks and some are more into the financial piece of asset management, right? Or some are like nuts and bolts asset management, engineering, maintenance. But that's really something that we are still evolving. I've just started the role. I'm trying to get the lay of the land, and hopefully there is a knowledge development plan that is out there. There's publication of guidance that this group is coordinating as well. The responsibility is under KLG. So there's definitely a lot of opportunities there to collaborate and with the ALN, I think.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Jesse, can you think of any associations that we could link to through transportation, transit? How do you see synergies with related associations?
I think Mildred mentioned many of those. There's also one other one I thought might be interesting is SMRP, Society for Maintenance and Reliability Professionals. They're very focused on ISO approach, and they you're preaching to the choir with those folks, and a lot of the people that I've dealt with in transportation, especially at the middle management level, are heavily involved in SMRP. IAM, the Institute for Asset Management, if I'm not mistaken, I think when they kicked off the New York chapter, Tom Prendergast was like the a keynote speaker when
He
they,
was.
yeah. So they, there's a little bit, Tom Prendergast was the president CEO of New York MTA at that time, and gave just an amazing speech showing his leadership and his push for asset management at the program at that time was really great. So they have some roots there in asset management. APTA, of course, TRB is really one that's focused a little bit more on the policy and how it's going to change. But I think also APTA, we might need to build some inroads there.
Yes.
And Kimon, you mentioned that the National Institute of Building Sciences was taking the concept of building information models to apply to bridges, and bridges are needed in transit. Do you see a possible overlap there?
I think there isn't. I don't think it's NIBS that's leading it. I think it's actually the Building Smart International, but NIBS is involved with it. And
Okay.
Roger Grant at NIBS has been involved with that as well. It'd be good to connect what the overlap is, but I think a lot of these efforts are pretty interesting because you're starting to see overlaps that should connect that maybe are not. So we need to identify things that might be duplicative or not reinvent the wheel. So that's a good point.
Right. Right. Go ahead, Jack.
So just listening to Mildred and Jesse, it makes me think, maybe an untapped resource for us are some of these leaders like Tom Pendergrass and Thad Allen, who absolutely embrace asset management, have been leaders in asset management in their different organizations, but who may have gone on to other jobs or may have even retired. And maybe because of the credibility and the gravitas that they bring to the conversation, maybe we ought to spend a little more time reaching out to some of them and seeing if we could create maybe some kind of a board of advisors or something which would allow them to connect with what we're trying to do and help push it forward.
Well, I'm glad you
Great
mentioned
idea.
that because we did just start that with Admiral Allen, so we're back on track there. But let's have a leadership approach and target leaders. Maybe Mildred can help us
I can.
reach out.
With Tom Prendergast, yeah. And maybe Cedric Fulton and a few others, yes.
Yeah, that would be huge because you guys, you've been players in this space and you know who some of those leaders are.
Right.
And that may be an untapped resource that we just need to reach out to.
I'll definitely help you put that together somehow. I just need to find some addresses, but I can definitely call those folks.
That's a
We'll
great
help
idea.
you with that. We'll help
Yes.
you with that.
Thanks.
All right, so we're coming to the top of the hour. I want to thank everyone and give everyone a chance to make any closing comments.
I mean, I just want to say thank you. I don't have a whole lot more to say, but this has been a really fantastic forum to really have these great discussions. I learned so much, but at the same time, I enjoyed sharing what I know and hopefully, continue to work with you guys. So that's great.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Jesse?
We just spent 2 hours, this hour and then a previous one with Kimon and Mildred, and it was great speaking with both of you and with this group. Just very appreciative to be on the panel and reconnect with Mildred and to meet Kimon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jack?
Well, the reason I got excited about listening to the panel, not only because I know the people on the panel and think very highly of them, is because when you think about in the world of legislation in the United States, the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, which was the author of MAP 21, is probably more ahead of any other legislative body, or at least congressional body, in terms of being aware of asset management and promoting it. And so I wanted to kind of connect with these folks to find out what was happening and also to just start tossing out some ideas on how we might engage, build on the successes that have already begun and then help, push them further. We don't, there are other huge areas like energy. We don't have this in energy. We've got a vestigial thing in water, but it's really, they know how to spell asset management, but they haven't really pushed it anywhere near as far as they have in the transportation world. And the other thing in transportation, people forget, transportation is not just public transit agencies. It's state highways. It's railroads. It's aircraft. It's pipelines. Strangely enough, and so it's there's a whole transportation space that we often just don't think about. But it's important that we do.
Well, thank you for jumping in as an unannounced guest. We appreciate it. Kimon?
Thanks for having me, and it was great presenting with Jesse and Mildred and Jack. Thanks for joining us, and Nick and Mike for putting this together. It was great.
Yeah, Jesse pointed out that this was 2 hours. This is a pretty long program for us, but it flew by as far as I was concerned. That was really great. Thank you for the dynamic discussion. So Nick, you want to bring us home?
Sure, yeah. Before I thank our sponsors, I just wanted to remember this quote, kind of re-envisioning infrastructure as a platform for human flourishing. I just really liked that concept, and I like that transportation is starting to think about it in that terms, and I would love to see other infrastructure industries think about it.
And I forgot to thank our attendees. Really appreciate you attending. Thank you for being a great audience.
And we couldn't do this without our patron sponsors. So one last time for the day, Definitive Logic, Onuma System especially for Kimon Onuma's participation today and in other programming for years at this point, ABS Quality Evaluations and ABS Group. Again, we're very grateful for their continued support, as well as our other organizational members, of which Lifecycle Engineering is a big one, with Jesse Rothkopf participating in this program today, and then ALN Thursday at 4 previously. We had a member from Zerco participate in the earlier program today. And then a shout out for the Andrew James Advisory Group's upcoming course, ALN 855K Professional Certification course that starts November 8th. So please reach out if you're interested in taking that course. And yeah, I think everyone said their closing remarks. So I think that will do it.
Thank you, everybody. The comment
Thank
section
you.
was very active. Really appreciate that from the participants.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.